If you're in the mood for a sweet treat, then you've come to the right place, because today we are making mochi. Now the first step in making mochi is actually to prepare all of our delicious fillings, and the first one I'm going to make is a traditional red bean or Anko filling. So to start off this recipe, I just rinsed around a cup of red Adzuki beans and poured them into a medium-sized pot. Then I added around 2 cups of water. Now the amount of water isn't really important as long as your beans stay covered the whole time, so feel free to add some more hot water if your level starts getting low. Then I placed on the lid and brought it to a boil. Once the water comes to a boil, we can turn the heat down and let it simmer for around 1.5 hours. Yup, you heard me right, 1.5 hours. And with all that extra time, we can start on our second filling, chocolate ganache. So for our chocolate ganache filling, I started by adding around 2 cups of semi-sweet chocolate chips into a bowl along with 1 cup of heavy cream. Then I placed the bowl in the microwave and heated it for around a minute. As you can see, when I stirred it, the chocolate was beginning to melt and combine with the cream, so I put it back in the microwave a couple more times at 30-second intervals, stirring in between to keep everything evenly mixed. Once the chocolate was completely melted and smooth, I added 4 tablespoons of butter and stirred it in to melt and combine. This will help to give our ganache a smoother texture and a richer flavor. Then we can cover it with plastic wrap and place it in the fridge to chill and set. By that time, my beans were done cooking, so I took them off the stove and placed them in a blender. And I admit it took me way too long to realize that blender was too small, but once I did, I transferred my beans to a much more reasonably sized blender and also added 1 cup of brown sugar. I gave it a preliminary mix to help my blender out, and I also added a half teaspoon of salt and blended it up. How long you blend for depends on how smooth you want your red bean paste to be. I wanted mine relatively smooth but with some remaining bits of bean, so I blended for around 45 seconds. Now we're almost done with our red bean paste. What we have now is already super delicious, but it's not thick enough to go into our mochi, so we have to dehydrate it in a pan. I just poured my mixture into a non-stick pan and heated it on medium-high heat, stirring constantly to prevent it from burning. Once I got it into a nice thick paste, I took it off the heat and placed it in a bowl to cool. Once our red bean paste has cooled, we can take around a tablespoon of paste and shape it into balls and set them on a baking tray. Then we can set them aside until we're ready to put them in our mochi. Now onto our last filling, black sesame paste. So for this filling, I started by placing around a half cup of sesame seeds into a spice grinder. I ground the sesame as finely as I could and then poured it into a bowl. I added around a 1/4 cup of white sugar and mixed it together, but you can add more or less sugar depending on how sweet you want your filling. Periodically, you should also add some water, around a teaspoon at a time, to help bring the paste together. Just be careful not to add too much or your paste will not hold together when you try to put it in the mochi. Optionally, you can also add around 2 teaspoons of melted butter to help tie all the flavors together. Once everything is evenly mixed and you've gotten the consistency you want, you can make little balls the same as you did your red bean filling and place them on a baking tray. By now, our chocolate ganache should be set, so you can take that out of the fridge and make balls with that as well. I would recommend keeping your chocolate ganache balls in the fridge until you're ready to fill so that they don't become soft. But now it's finally time to make our mochi dough. So to get started, we will place 1 cup of glutinous rice flour in a bowl along with 1 cup of white sugar and a half teaspoon of salt. Then pour in 1 cup of water and stir until you have a smooth mixture with no lumps. Now there are multiple ways to cook the mochi, but the easiest is going to be microwaving it. So go ahead and place your mochi mixture into the microwave and heat for around 3 minutes. Once you take it out, you'll notice that some of the mixture has begun to cook and become slightly solid and translucent. Take a firm spatula or rice scooper and give the mochi dough a good mix before putting it back in the microwave for another minute. Then take it out and mix it again. Now most of the dough will be solid, but there's still some liquid, so we should microwave for 1 more minute. Now once there's no more liquid in the dough and it has turned slightly translucent, we can knead it for around 30 seconds. This will help to make our mochi nice and chewy. Then we can lay a generous layer of cornstarch down on a flat surface and pour out our mochi dough. Make sure to be very careful while handling the dough because it is very hot and sticky, and always remember to cover your hands in cornstarch while touching it. So now we can take our mochi dough, which is approaching volcanic temperatures, and spread it out on our cornstarch. Make sure to sprinkle more cornstarch on new areas when they're exposed to prevent them from getting sticky. Then we can go grab our red bean balls and fill our mochi. So to fill our mochi, we will tear off a piece of the dough and use our hands to stretch it out and flatten it into a disc. Then take a ball of filling and place it in the center. Then just take the sides of our mochi and bring them up around the filling, pinching tightly at the top to seal in our delicious little bean ball. Then just flip it over and shape it before setting aside and repeating until all of our red bean mochi has been filled. For our sesame mochi, the mochi dough will be prepared the same as last time, but because we're going to cover it in a mixture of black and white sesame seeds, we're going to pour it into a lightly greased dish to cool instead of pouring it on cornstarch so that it retains its stickiness. Now I tried several different methods of trying to fill this mochi without it sticking to my hands, but the one that seemed to work best was just wetting my hands before taking a piece of mochi and filling it, re-wetting my hands as needed. Then I put the mochi into my bowl of sesame seeds and pressed them on to cover. Once all of our sesame mochi have been filled and rolled in seeds, we can move on to our final mochi, the chocolate mochi. So for this mochi, I made the dough the same as the last two, but before I added the water, I also added a 1/4 cup of cocoa powder to the dry ingredients and mixed. Now we have a decadent chocolate mochi dough that smells an awful lot like brownies. I cooked it in the microwave and poured it out on a layer of cocoa powder instead of cornstarch. Then I retrieved our chocolate ganache balls from the fridge and filled the mochi. I will say that it was definitely easier to fill the mochi once the dough had cooled down a bit so the filling didn't melt as fast, so I would recommend waiting a couple minutes before trying to fill them. Once we have all of our chocolate mochi filled and shaped, we can finally sit back and relax because we've just finished our mochi. So let's take a look at our beany, chocolatey, and sesame goodness now, shall we? So today we made 3 different kinds of mochi: traditional mochi with a red bean filling, sesame mochi with a sesame seed coating, and a delicious chocolate mochi with chocolate ganache filling. All 3 of these mochi were chewy, gooey, and delicious, and they were so fun to make. I think this might have been the most fun recipe I've made so far, and it made my kitchen smell awesome. I really hope you get the chance to try out these mochi recipes, and if you do, let me know how it goes. Now this video took me over 10 hours to film and even longer to edit, so if you enjoyed, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and consider sharing it with your friends. It would really help me out. And as always, thank you for watching, keep cooking, and I will see you next time with a new video. Bye!